want to talk for just a minute about waiting on God. When it seems like God delays, waiting on God. I want to title it, Are We There Yet? Are we there yet? Psalm 13. If you would help me in this, 4 times this passage says, how long? So I'm going to pause after I read it and have you repeat it. How long? How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? Say, how long?
How long
shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long, say it, will my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Say, O Lord my God. Enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say I have prevailed against him. Lest those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. And I love this. There is a definitive change in the tone of the psalmist. But I have trusted in your mercy. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. And may God add a blessing to the reading of his word this morning. As I said before, this is actually a song. It's hard for us to imagine this being a song because it's not like the songs we sing today. Most of the songs that we sing in worship today are either upbeat or very worshipful, seem very holy to be able to worship the Lord in song and in singing. But in this we see a very real and a very raw and a very transparent and a very honest approach that David has. This is a psalm that David wrote, and he gave it to his song leader. He gave it to the minister of music, if you will. And as he is giving this to him, I want us to understand that God actually invites this kind of transparency. Many of us look at this and we think, oh my, how can David say, how long? I want us to understand that David was upset. Can I tell you that he was mad about the circumstances in his life? He was upset and he was literally saying, God, you're in control, then how come I'm having to wait like this, God? I want you to understand that. Now, let me tell you this, that God can handle your questions and he can handle your transparency. Many times we come before God and we do like we do with other people. We say, well, everything's good. I'm 6 feet up instead of 6 feet under. And we do all these little things to tell people that we're okay when we're not really okay. But can I tell you this, that God knows your heart. He knows where you're at. He knows if you're mad about the circumstances. He knows if you're upset. He knows if you're tired of waiting. He knows all of those kinds of things. And we are invited to be transparent before God. That should probably just relieve somebody. To know that God already knows your heart. So when you come before him in prayer and when you come before him in praise, God can handle that you're disappointed with life as where it is right now. I mean, you can understand where David's at. Most of us have been in a place like David in our lifetime. And you may be there right now. It could be a long-standing health problem. A financial situation where there seems to be no solution. Maybe a work situation or a personal relationship that seems to be a constant source of strain upon your life. It may be a wayward child that you've prayed over for years and years, and it seems like there's no movement, that there's no change. How many understand where I'm talking about today? whatever the situation is that you may find yourself in, I want you to know that we all face difficult times and troubled times, times when we say, God, where are you? How long is this going to last? And I want you to understand that God understands your heart. It's all right. Look at your neighbor and tell him it's all right. God understands our fears. He understands our frustrations. He understands all of those things that are going through our mind. He even understands when the enemy tries to put things into our mind. David says, how long? 4 times. 4 times. I mean, he's emphatic about it. When you see something said 1 time in the Bible, you notice it. 2 times you recognize that God's trying to draw attention to it. 3 times begins to really jump out at you. But 4 times in this passage, David says, how long? Yeah. And in my notes, I put a question mark and an exclamation point. How many have had children when you're traveling to Florida or traveling somewhere and they're in the back seat and they're bored? This was the days before you had all these little iPads where they could watch a whole movie on the way to Florida. But in my day, you just got stuck in the back seat. And in my day, can I just tell them, this whole generation, they'd say, just go ahead and climb up in the back window and go to sleep because we don't want to hear about how bored you are. And we would cry out from the back seat, how long? Are we there yet? Is there any understanding of where David is? God, I've been obedient to you. God, I've sacrificed and I've worshiped you. And God, I don't understand why am I having to wait so long. God, when will the promise come? When will the anointing come? When will the blessing come? God, how long? Look at your neighbor and say, how long? As we look at these Psalms, we have to put ourselves in the place of the psalmist, the writer, David. Now, can I tell you that when we look at this, and sometimes we see the boldness of the psalmist, and while David is questioning how long, he's not questioning God's ability nor his power to make a difference. And there's a difference. Amen? You see, we can know that we know that we know that God's going to do it. But then there's the time when we don't see the results yet. When we're searching and we're seeking and we're saying, how long, God? God, your word says this, but yet I don't see the answer. I don't see the results. God, how long? How many can associate with David here? How long? How long, God, will it be before my prayers are answered? David, if you know anything about David's life, when David had killed the giant, Goliath, and they hunted down the enemy and they took care of them and they ran them off, all of a sudden David is now being hunted himself. Saul is bitterly jealous of David. The ladies in the town who began to sing and began to celebrate the victories of Israel were singing songs like, Saul has killed his thousands, but David is 10,000. And so Saul is bitterly jealous. And the Bible tells us already that the Spirit of God has left Saul. And so David is in a bad place. He's in a place like between a rock and a hard place where he's trying to serve God and he's trying to serve the king and he's trying to do do the right thing. How many ever been there? You're trying to do the right thing, but yet it seems like God's not moving. It seems like you're in a hopeless situation, but David understands. He begins to cry out to God, how long, oh God? How long? And he enters into a frustrating period of time waiting on God. Waiting on God to deliver him from the attacks of Saul. Running from his life. Imagine King David. He's already been anointed, but yet he has not come to the throne yet. And he's running for his life. He's hiding in caves, mountain crags. He's hiding in the desert and forest, even in the enemy territory. And at his lowest point, even his own men are about to pick up stones and to kill him. Maybe it's just this point that David writes Psalm 13. Exhausted, depressed, seems like there's no way of escaping Saul and his pursuits. And he goes to the point of saying, God, if you don't intervene, if you don't move, I'm going to die. David has been hiding. He's been running. He's exhausted. He's having to scrounge, if that's a word, for food. You know what I'm talking about? He's having to hunt. He's having to do all these kinds of things when God has said to him, you are to be the king. To the prophet Samuel. How long? How long, God? I don't understand. How many of us have found ourselves saying, God, I don't understand. How long? How long? David was anointed king when he was probably 15 to 17 years old. But he didn't reign until he was 30 years old. What's happening here? Why that time? Why that lag in what God has said versus what God is seeming to be doing? And it's during this time that God is transforming the shepherd boy into a king. You see, a shepherd would not take the throne, but a king with a king's heart and a king's mind and a king's understanding would take the throne. And it's during the times of difficulty. It's during the time when we're waiting and we're saying, how long, God, that he begins to transform us and he begins to change us, and we begin to keep learning that we can put our trust in God, that we can believe what he says no matter what the circumstances, no matter what, I'm preaching right now, no matter what the situation, no matter what is going on in our life, no matter how empty the checkbook, no matter the report of the doctor, no matter where I am and where I think I should be, God's in charge, he's in control, and I can lean and learn and trust in God. How long? How long, God? Do we find ourselves in that situation, waiting on God? And I want to tell you that God is transforming you into your destiny. He's changing you. It may not feel like it. It may feel very bad. It may feel like God has forgotten you, that he's forsaken you, and that you're very frustrated with life. But God knows what he's doing. Forgotten, forsaken, frustrated. Those are the feelings that David has, and he expresses them so greatly in this psalm. He says, God, I feel like you've forgotten me. Now, forgotten is unintentional. I forgot to do this. It's unintentional. And so David says, God, you've forgotten me. Yeah. And that's pretty bad. David doesn't want to be forgotten. He's for some reason, he thinks that God has forgot that he was anointed to be king. He seems to think that, well, maybe somehow God has just left me out here and he's doing other more important things and he's forgotten about me. But I want you to understand that David never thought that God would let him suffer for as long as he did. He never imagined it, and we never imagine that God will allow us to suffer. But God is preparing us. He's molding us. He's shaping us so that when we get to the place of being able to fulfill our destiny, that we don't blow it. Come on. Some of you, the vision that God has given to you, if he gave it to you right now, you'd fold and you'd fall and you'd blow it. Because you're not ready. And God knows that. And wouldn't it be awful if he gave it to you and he said, here you go, and you just fell flat on your face and you're not a testimony for the goodness and the mercy of God and the plan of God and how awesome he is because you have failed. But yet what do we do in the waiting? What do we do in the waiting? We feel like God's forgotten us, but even worse, we feel like God's forsaken us. Yeah. What if I preach like this? Turn my back on this side of the congregation. That's what David said. God, you've forsaken me. You have purposefully turned your back on me. I mean, David is real. He's like, God, it doesn't even feel like you just forgot about me. That would be, understandable. Maybe you're a busy God, but you've forsaken me. You've let it all drop. I'm running for my life. I'm thinking that I'm going to die. And God, it feels like you've turned your back on me. That you have forsaken me. Let's be real. How many have ever felt almost forsaken by God? God, why would you let me suffer so long? You see, we want God's promise, but we really don't want the process. Did you hear me? We want God's promise. We want the victory. We want to go toward the vision that he has for our life, but we don't understand the process. If I were to take an athlete and put them into a different sport than they're used to playing, they would not understand that process. And they would think, why are you teaching me? You see, I used to be a coach. And I taught high jump. Taught my daughter, coached another young man who's very possibly going to be in the Olympics. And there were things that I taught them that didn't make any sense to them at first. But there's a process. How many knows that God has a process for your life? And when you don't understand it, you have to take a step back and begin to put your trust and your faith in God. See, we're impatient. How many would say that? God, I've been impatient with the process. I don't know what you're trying to do with me, God. I don't understand. We can feel forgotten, forsaken. Can I tell you that it's impossible for God to forget you? Isaiah 49, verse 15, 16 says this, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child that she has born? Though she may forget, look at this, what does it say? I will not forget. Even a nursing mom, I don't know how that happens, might forget about her baby, but he's saying, I will not forget. I won't forget, the next verse. I won't forget you, he says. See, I have engraved on the palm of my hand. I have engraved on the palms of my hand. I have engraved you on the palms of my hand. How many remember being a teenager? This just came to me. And there was some little guys or some little girl that you liked. And you get out a pen and you doodle that name in the middle of your palm in your hand. T-E-R-E-S-A-L. She's so pretty. And we didn't engrave it, but we wrote the name inside of her hand. So that when we looked at it, we were like, oh yeah. Look at that. Isn't she pretty? Ooh, she's just a knockout. She's so pretty. She's so sweet. Can I tell you, it's impossible for God to forget you because he loves you that much. He's engraved you upon the palm of his hand. You. Not just your neighbor. Not just somebody you think is important. But you. He has engraved you upon the palm of his hand. Look how special you are. And then he tells Israel, because that's who he's speaking to, your walls, remember those fortified walls I talked about a few weeks ago? He said, they're ever before me. I see them. I see the fortification around you. And God's saying, I love you. And those walls, if the enemy comes against you, I'm going to protect you. And I'm going to keep you because you're special to me. Look at your neighbor and say, you're special. God has engraved us upon the palm of his hand. Sometimes we can feel forsaken. David felt forsaken, like God had purposefully hid his face. And he thought that more than once. Psalm 22, David writes, my God, why have you forsaken me? Can I tell you this is real? You may not be feeling it right now, but there are times in your Christian walk, if you haven't gotten there, you will. Where it feels like, not only has God forgotten me, but he's forsaken me. It feels like it. It's not true. It's not a reality, but it feels like it. Even Jesus cries out these very words that David wrote in Psalm 22. My God, as he's hanging on the cross, suffering and bleeding and dying, and stripes upon his back, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? We know that God didn't forsake him. That he's ever present. He's an ever-present help in time of trouble. Yes. Psalm 46. But yet it feels like we've been forsaken. God's forgotten. God's forsaken us. But Hebrews 13:5 tells us this. You ought to know it. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Yeah. Never leave you or forsake you. I read a story about a tribe, and I don't remember all of it, but one of the rites of passage was that a young man, when he became of age, would have to go into the woods, and they would cut a tree down, and he would sit on the stump of the tree. And they would blindfold him. And he would hear all the sounds, and he would hear all the animals, and he would hear all of the things, and the wind would blow, and trees would creak and crack, and you know how many have ever been in the woods, and it's just scary. But this rite of passage was to stay there all night long until the sun came up. And in the morning, he could take the blindfold off. And when he did, what he had realized is that his father was sitting on a stump right beside of him. Amen. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. It may feel like it. It may hurt like it. You've been forgotten. You've been forsaken. Look God says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Not only can we feel forgotten and forsaken, but we can feel frustrated. Nobody in here like me ever gets frustrated, do you? Just ever get frustrated? And David is frustrated for a couple of reasons. Number one, his emotions. He said, I have sorrow in my heart daily. Not just a little bit of sorrow, but every day. God, I get up and I've got to run and I can't stay here because Saul has been told by people who were supposed to love me that I'm here and he's chasing after me. And God, I don't understand it and my emotions are overwhelming me. Anybody ever been there? Frustrated because of emotions. Sorrow is in my heart every day. God, I don't understand it. God, help me. Frustrated because of emotions. Yes. Frustrated because of the enemy. And I tell you, you and I, thankfully, will probably never face a physical enemy like David did. Saul was king, in charge of all of the armies of Israel, had at his disposal all of the resources that he needed to track David down like an animal. And David's saying, I'm frustrated. Anybody ever been frustrated? I know I'm preaching to somebody right now. Can I tell you, this man of God gets frustrated? Get frustrated. Let me just be real and raw. When I walk into a service and there's a ton of empty pews like it is today, and I've spent hour after hour studying and preparing and praying and believing God that he'll touch people, and the very people that probably need to be touched by the Word of God, not even here. Frustrated. God, what's going on? You gave me a vision of how God it was going to be, but yet I don't see it, God. Frustration. God, you told me my children were going to be saved. God, you said my needs were going to be met, but yet I don't see it. I'm frustrated. How many know what I'm talking about this morning? There's a frustration that David is feeling. A frustration, running for 15 years, hiding out from Saul. And Saul's no comparison to the enemy that we have, the devil. When we look at this, and how many know where David is now? How many feel in your spirit where he's at? How many have been there at times? You may not have been there, you may not be there right now, or you may be. But what can we learn from this psalm that David writes out and tells the worship leader? Oh my goodness, it don't sound like a worship song yet, does it? Not at all. It sounds like a pity party. But David's saying, I feel like I've been forgotten. I feel like I've been forsaken. God, I'm frustrated. But then he begins to, can I call that stewing? Stewing. Anybody else old enough to know what stewing is about? Stewing is whenever your emotions and your frustrations and all those things just begin to rise to the top. When you stew something in a pot, you begin to boil it, and all the things, the fat and the stuff that you don't want to eat begins to boil up out of that. And so David had done a whole lot of stewing before God. And I tell you, it's okay. God understands it, because what he's doing is he's taking the rough edges off. And iron is sharpening iron. And he's making you sharper. And he's making you more resilient. And he is giving you the stamina. Come on, I'm preaching. And he is helping you to become the person that you need to be in order to have the ministry and the things that God has declared upon your life. He is making you into what he has called you to be. And it's all right, because when you begin to stir and you get rid of those emotions and you get rid of those frustrations, then you can come honestly before God. Yes. And what David begins to do is he begins to stir himself. Talking to himself. The Bible tells us that David encouraged himself in the Lord. Anybody? I know I've done that. I know I've done that. Oh, God, I know you still love me. God, consider me, David says. Consider me. God, turn your face back towards me. It feels like you're facing the other way, but consider me. Oh, Lord, my God, he says. So powerful. Yes. Oh, Lord. That's Jehovah. My personal. He's mine. I am God's. And he is mine. God, Jehovah, the most powerful, that word God, the most powerful. God, you're the most powerful. You see my situation. And he begins to stir himself. And he begins to call on a personal and powerful God. Come on, help me now. He begins to cry out, God, I know where I am, but I also know who you are. I know who I am, but I know whose I am. And he begins to cry out before God. Oh, God, consider me. Oh, Lord, my God, help me. And he's stirring himself. And he begins to change his focus. You see, many times, what was he doing at first? He had tunnel vision. All he could see was the problems and the situations and the chasing and the turmoil and all of that. All he could see. But then suddenly his focus turns to an almighty, most powerful, personal God. Oh, we just need to have a change of perspective and a change of focus. We need to understand that God is for us and not against us. No matter what the enemy may try, that God is still God. No matter what weapon the enemy may form against me, it shall not prosper. No matter what sickness the devil comes against me with, I am declaring the health and the healing of the Lord by the power of the tongue. And life and death there comes from the power of the tongue. You see, we need to change our focus. Look at your neighbor and do this and say, refocus. Refocus. No matter how discouraged or defeated David felt, he never turned away from God. He knew that his deliverance was in God. And he began to look away from the problems and to look towards God who could deliver him. You see, he knew that God had promised him the kingship. And he also knew that God had the power to help him to ascend to the throne. You see, when your faith begins to fall, you have to change your focus. I will look unto the hills. From whence comes my help? What's that? It's a change of focus. From, oh my gosh, oh, Lord, look what's going on. To, great and mighty King, exalted one, Jehovah Jireh, my provider, Jehovah Nisi, the Lord God, my banner, Jehovah Rapha, Jehovah Shalom, the Lord God, my peace. You see, he begins to look up and to refocus. Refocus. God, help us to refocus. You see, it's not easy to get on your face before God and to say, Lord, I've let my emotions take over me. How many would say that we've done that? Lord, I've let the troubles surround me and cave in on me, it feels like. But, oh Lord, my God, in the midst of all of this, help me and deliver me. And then once David got his eyes off of Saul and his troubles, You see, he had stewed, and then he had stirred, and then he was able to surrender. God, I know I'm in the palm of your hand. I don't understand the situations. I don't understand the emotions and the feelings that I have. But God, I'm yours. And you're mine. And that's when you see the most powerful thing about this song. It changes to but. Nothing else matters but you, God. And he begins to surrender to God. How did David get into that place of worship? That place of surrender? He began to look for God in the midst of the turmoil. Can I tell you something? I know that some of you are going through hell and high water, that God it feels like he's forgotten you and forsaken you. You're frustrated, but I want you to know, look for God. Look for him. Our vacation Bible school, I think one of the most powerful things that they have in that, they call them God signs. Those who serve in vacation Bible school. And to us, sometimes we ask the kids, how did you see God this week? What was he doing? Well, how did you see him? And they begin to tell you about what seems to you like little things, but they're powerful to them. Are we seeing God? Are we seeing him in the midst of the storm? The disciples saw Jesus in the midst of the storm. They were afraid at first, but then they said, hey, Jesus, would you get in the boat with us? I want you to know he's already in the boat with you. You can surrender to him. You can talk to him. You can surrender to his will in your life. Teresa, would you come to the piano? David keeps looking for God. Keeps looking for him. And his point of view changes. His perspective, his focus changes. And then he begins to sing a song of triumph. Notice nothing has changed externally for David yet. If you're waiting on your situation to change before you worship and before you praise, you've got it backwards. Let me say that again. If you're waiting on your situation and your problem to change before you worship God, you've got it backwards. Worship him in the midst of the situation. Nothing's changed for him. He's still outnumbered. He's still facing Saul. He's still running for his life. But spiritually, his eyes have been opened up. And he sees.